Have you ever felt completely alone, only to suddenly realize maybe you're not? Being alone is something we all experience, whether it's staying home while house-sitting, going on a solo date, or working a late shift. Most of the time, it's peaceful, ordinary. But sometimes, the ordinary can take a dark and terrifying turn. Sometimes, being alone is exactly when the nightmares begin. In today's video, we'll dive into 3 real-life creepy stories that happened to people when they least expected it. These tales aren't urban legends or ghost stories. They're real, bone-chilling encounters with strangers that will make you think twice about your next quiet night alone. First, imagine this. You're house-sitting for a relative, relaxing in a guest room when you hear a voice outside. A calm, repeated hello. When you look through the window, you see a woman staring at you, smiling. But instead of knocking or asking for help, she just stands there. Then, later that night, she's back, this time at the window, her unsettling grin never fading. Next, picture yourself after a breakup, scrolling through a dating app, hoping to meet someone new. You connect with a girl, arrange to meet, but instead of her showing up, you're met by a strange man claiming to be her father. He tells you to get in his car. What do you do? And what happens when you realize he's tracking your location, and he's not giving up so easily? And finally, the third story takes us to a quiet high school at night. An 18-year-old janitor working alone is tasked with moving equipment to the basement. At first, it's just another shift, but then he finds something terrifying. A mannequin that wasn't there before, movement under a cloth, and loud banging in the air vents above. He's not alone, but whoever is with him isn't supposed to be there. What connects all of these stories is that each protagonist was completely alone when things went wrong. No one was coming to help. No one could explain what they had encountered. And even after the events ended, the fear lingered, because what happened to them could happen to anyone. These aren't just stories, they're warnings. They show how quickly isolation can turn into terror and how small decisions can mean the difference between safety and danger. So, lock your doors, turn off the lights, and prepare yourself. These are 3 creepy stories you shouldn't watch alone. Let's start with our first tale, The Smiling Stranger. House-sitting for a relative is usually uneventful, a chance to relax in a new space, enjoy some quiet time, and maybe binge a few shows. For the narrator of this story, house-sitting for their grandmother seemed like the perfect opportunity for just that. The house was familiar, cozy, and tucked away in a peaceful neighborhood, the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened. They arrived in the evening, unpacked their overnight bag, and settled into the guest bedroom upstairs. The room was modest, with 2 twin beds and a large window that overlooked the front yard. Before heading to bed, they made sure to lock all the doors and double-check the windows. It was a habit their grandmother had insisted on, though it felt unnecessary in such a quiet area. Around midnight, as they were lying in bed scrolling through their phone, they heard something. At first, it was faint, almost like a whisper, but then it grew clearer. A voice, a woman's voice, repeatedly saying, "Hello? Hello?" The narrator froze, heart racing, and listened closely. The voice wasn't coming from the TV downstairs or a phone. It was coming from outside. Sitting up slowly, they turned their head toward the window. The blinds were drawn, but the sound was unmistakable now. Someone was standing on the porch. They crept out of bed, their phone clutched tightly, and moved toward the window. Peeking through the blinds, they spotted her, an older woman standing on the porch, staring directly at the window with a smile that sent shivers down their spine. Her eyes were unblinking, and her grin was wide, too wide. It didn't make sense. It was midnight, and the woman wasn't knocking on the door or ringing the bell. She just stood there, smiling and softly calling out, "Hello? Hello?" It felt deliberate, calculated, as if she knew someone was watching her. Panicked, the narrator let the blinds fall shut and stepped back from the window, trying to calm the rising dread in their chest. Maybe she needed help. Maybe she was lost. But something about her smile, her silence, felt deeply wrong. Why hadn't she knocked or spoken louder if she needed assistance? And why was she staring directly at the guest room window, as if she knew they were there? Forcing themselves to stay calm, they retreated to the bedroom and closed the door. Minutes passed, and the voice outside stopped. A wave of relief washed over them. Maybe she had left, but that relief was short-lived. A loud bang echoed from the window. Their stomach dropped. The sound wasn't gentle. It was deliberate, forceful. Someone was hitting the glass. Mustering the courage to look again, they crept toward the blinds and peeked through. The woman was still there. Only now, she was at the window. Her face was pressed close to the glass, her smile even wider, her breath fogging up the pane. She didn't say anything this time. She just stared, her eyes locked on theirs. The narrator's body moved before their brain could process what was happening. They bolted out of the room, slammed the door behind them, and ran upstairs to the guest bedroom. Locking the door, they huddled on the bed, every noise amplified by their fear. For the rest of the night, they stayed awake, heart pounding, listening for any sound of movement. But after the banging, the woman seemed to disappear. There were no footsteps, no voice, just silence. When morning finally came, they crept downstairs cautiously. The porch was empty. The window was intact, though faint smudges marked where the woman's face had been pressed against the glass. Shaken, they called their grandmother, desperate for an explanation. Her response sent chills through them. A few days earlier, while grocery shopping, their grandmother had noticed a woman following her around the store. She'd assumed it was a coincidence at first, but the woman had stayed close, appearing in every aisle. She'd even followed her to the parking lot, watching as she loaded groceries into her car. The grandmother had managed to drive off without incident, but the encounter had left her uneasy. Hearing this, the narrator's mind raced. Was it the same woman? How had she found the house? And what did she want? To this day, they don't know who the woman was or why she showed up at their grandmother's home. But the memory of her smile, her eerie persistence, and the way she seemed to know exactly where they were still haunts them. For Nicholas, a Syracuse University freshman, the transition to college life hadn't been easy. He was fresh off a painful breakup and, like many people his age, decided to try a dating app to distract himself. At first, it was just harmless fun, chatting, swiping, and looking for a connection. Then he matched with a girl named Stephanie. Stephanie seemed like a dream. Her profile was simple but charming, with pictures that made her look friendly and approachable. The two clicked almost immediately. They spent days chatting, their conversations flowing effortlessly. Stephanie was sweet and empathetic, telling Nicholas that she understood what it was like to go through a breakup. Her kindness felt genuine, and Nicholas began looking forward to their chats. After a few days, Stephanie suggested meeting up. She said she lived nearby and could meet him close to campus. Nicholas was thrilled but nervous. His first college date. She suggested a quiet street not far from the main campus, an area Nicholas recognized as being close to some student housing. It felt safe enough, and he agreed. The day of the date, Nicholas got ready with a mix of excitement and nervousness. He texted Stephanie for confirmation, and she replied promptly, assuring him she couldn't wait to meet. Everything seemed fine, until he arrived at the meeting spot. It was a little after 7 p.m., and the street was unusually quiet. The soft glow of streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalks, and Nicholas checked his phone. No new messages. He scanned the area but saw no one who looked like Stephanie. He texted her, "I'm here. Are you close?" Moments later, a car pulled up. It wasn't a student's car. It was an older sedan with dark-tinted windows. The driver's side window rolled down, revealing a man in his late 40s or early 50s, wearing a casual jacket and a friendly smile. Nicholas felt a pang of confusion. This wasn't what he was expecting. The man leaned slightly out of the window and called out, "Hey, you must be Nicholas, right? I'm Stephanie's dad." Nicholas froze. Stephanie hadn't mentioned anything about her dad being involved. His unease grew as the man continued, "She's waiting just a few minutes away, but she couldn't meet you here. I can give you a ride to her." Alarm bells went off in Nicholas's mind. Something about the situation didn't add up. Why hadn't Stephanie mentioned this change in plans? Why was her father picking him up? And why hadn't Stephanie texted him directly about it? He decided to stall. "Where is she?" Nicholas asked, keeping his distance from the car. "I can just walk to meet her." The man smiled, but there was something unnerving about it. "She's close, don't worry," he said, brushing off the question. "Hop in, and I'll take you to her." Nicholas felt his pulse quicken. His instincts screamed at him to leave. He apologized, saying he wasn't comfortable getting in the car, and began walking away. The man didn't say anything else, but Nicholas could feel the man's eyes on him as he walked. A few minutes later, his phone buzzed. It was Stephanie, or at least, her account. The message read, "Why didn't you get in?" His heart sank. How did she know he hadn't gotten in the car? The realization hit him like a brick. Stephanie, or whoever was behind the account, was tracking his location. Somehow, they had access to where he was in real time. Panicking, Nicholas immediately stopped sharing his location through the app and picked up his pace. He wanted to get back to campus, where he knew he'd be safe. But before he could relax, he noticed headlights behind him. The same car from earlier was parked at the end of the block, its lights off. The man was still there. Nicholas tried to stay calm, acting as if he hadn't noticed the car. But the knot in his stomach tightened as he quickened his pace, the streetlights casting long, shifting shadows around him. When he reached the edge of campus, the car hadn't moved. He felt a sliver of relief, until he heard footsteps. He turned his head slightly and caught sight of the man, now out of the car, walking in his direction. Nicholas's fear erupted into pure adrenaline. He bolted, sprinting toward the nearest campus building. His lungs burned as he ran, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the empty sidewalks. He didn't dare look back, too afraid of what he might see. When he finally reached the safety of the dorms, he stumbled inside, panting and shaking. His friend, who had been waiting for him to return, immediately noticed his state and asked what had happened. Nicholas tried to explain, his words tumbling out in fragments. The car? The man? Stephanie isn't real. Together, they pieced the story together and reported the incident to campus security. Nicholas handed over screenshots of his conversations and explained how the man had tried to lure him into the car. Campus security encouraged him to file a report with the local police, which he did later that night. But the nightmare wasn't over. The next morning, Nicholas woke up to a chilling message from an unknown number. "You made a big mistake. You'll regret this." He blocked the number immediately and gave the message to the police. They told him it was likely a burner phone and difficult to trace. Despite their best efforts, the investigation didn't lead anywhere. The dating app account disappeared shortly after the incident, leaving no trail behind. For weeks, Nicholas felt on edge. Every unfamiliar car, every unknown face on campus made him nervous. Though he never saw the man again, the experience left a deep scar. He deleted the dating app and vowed never to use one again. To this day, Nicholas can't stop wondering, who was the man? Was Stephanie ever real, or was she just a facade to lure him in? And most terrifying of all, what would have happened if he had gotten into the car? Summer jobs are often boring, but for one 18-year-old janitor working night shifts at his local high school, the monotony was a welcome trade-off for the quiet hours and decent pay. He spent his nights mopping empty hallways, cleaning classrooms, and organizing storage room. The school, so lively during the day, felt entirely different at night, hushed, almost too still. But that summer, his last week on the job brought an experience he would never forget. It started on a Thursday night. The shift was going as usual, with his supervisor asking him to move a stack of chairs to the basement. The basement, a dimly lit area used for storage, was one of his least favorite places in the school. It was cold, smelled of mildew, and had poor lighting that made the shadows seem alive. Still, he shrugged off his discomfort and carried the chairs down in several trips. On his final trip, he noticed something strange. Near the far corner of the basement, where the shadows were darkest, A cloth-covered shape stood against the wall. It was a mannequin, the kind used in drama production, but he didn't recall seeing it there during his earlier trips. Maybe someone had moved it, he thought, though he couldn't imagine why. As he approached to place the last of the chairs, unease prickled at the back of his neck. The mannequin wasn't positioned naturally. It was slumped, its head tilted in a way that made it look like it was watching him. He told himself he was just imagining things, set the chairs down, and quickly left the basement. Back upstairs, he busied himself with other tasks, but his mind kept drifting back to the mannequin. Something about it didn't sit right with him. An hour later, curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to check the basement again. When he returned, the mannequin was still there, but the cloth that had covered it was now on the floor. It hadn't fallen naturally. It looked like someone had peeled it off deliberately. The mannequin's blank face stared at him from the shadows, and for a moment he thought he saw it shift slightly. His stomach tightened. Then, he noticed something even worse. There was movement under the cloth on the ground. Subtle, but unmistakable. Someone, or something, was under it. Panic set in, and he didn't wait to find out what it was. He turned and sprinted up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind him. He locked it, his hands trembling, and pressed his ear against the door to listen. Silence. For a moment, he thought it was over. Then came the banging. It wasn't on the door. It was above him. A metallic thud echoed through the hallway, followed by another and another. He looked up and realized the sound was coming from the air vents. Someone, or something, was crawling through the ducts, moving quickly toward him. The vents rattled violently as the banging grew louder, closer. The janitor's mind raced. Whoever was in the vents wasn't just trying to scare him. They were coming for him. Grabbing his keys, he sprinted down the hall, locking every door he passed. The banging followed him, growing more frantic, as if the person in the vents was trying to break through. Reaching the main office, he locked the door behind him and called his supervisor. When the call connected, he tried to explain what was happening, but his words came out in frantic bursts. "There's someone in the vents. They're trying to get in." His supervisor, clearly skeptical, told him to stay calm and finish his shift. Frustrated and terrified, the janitor hung up. The banging had stopped, but the silence was almost worse. He spent the rest of the night locked in the office, every sound making him jump. When morning came, he did a quick inspection of the basement before leaving for the day. The mannequin was gone, and so was the cloth. The air vents showed signs of damage, dents and scuff marks as if someone had been crawling through them. He considered reporting the incident again, but decided against it. It was his last week on the job, and he just wanted to be done with the place. Even now, years later, the janitor can't forget that night. Who, or what, was in the vents? Why was the mannequin there? And what would have happened if he hadn't locked the doors and fled? He may never have answers, but the memory is enough to keep him far away from basements, mannequins, and night shifts forever.